In this episode, we're going to make the technology side of a Security Operations Center, SOC, feel understandable and purposeful instead of mysterious and brand-driven. New learners often hear platform names tossed around as if everyone already knows what they mean, and that can create the false idea that security operations is mostly about buying the right products. In reality, tools are only valuable when you understand what job each tool is supposed to do and how those jobs connect to detection, investigation, and response. When you learn the technology categories at a high level, you can read exam questions more confidently because you can tell what a platform can realistically provide and what it cannot. The goal is not to memorize vendors or features, but to understand the roles that common platforms play in a functioning SOC and why those roles matter for operational success. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to think about SOC technology is as an operating system made of inputs, processing, decisions, and actions. Inputs are the events and signals coming from systems, networks, identities, applications, and cloud services, and without inputs you are effectively blind. Processing is what turns raw events into something usable by normalizing, correlating, and adding context so an analyst can make sense of what happened. Decisions are the human or automated judgments that determine whether something is suspicious, how urgent it is, and what should happen next. Actions are the steps taken to reduce risk, such as isolating a device, disabling an account, or opening an investigation record that drives coordinated response. Most platforms in a SOC specialize in one or two of these stages, and the reason multiple platforms exist is that no single tool does everything well for every environment. When you keep this pipeline in mind, the purpose of each technology category becomes clearer. One of the most common categories you will encounter is Security Information and Event Management, SIEM, and it helps to understand it as the central nervous system for many SOC operations. SIEM primarily collects event data from many sources, stores it, and makes it searchable so investigations can be evidence-driven rather than guesswork. It also supports correlation, which means connecting events that may seem unrelated until you view them together, such as a login followed by a sensitive access action. Another key role is alerting, where detection logic flags patterns that might indicate misuse or attack activity. The reason SIEM matters is that it provides centralized visibility and a consistent place to look for answers when something feels wrong. Without that centralized view, each investigation becomes a scavenger hunt across separate systems, and the time cost alone can turn minor events into major incidents. Although SIEM platforms are central, beginners should avoid the misconception that SIEM automatically equals good detection. SIEM is a platform, not a finished detection program, and the quality of outcomes depends on what data is sent, how consistent that data is, and how well detection logic is tuned for the environment. If the SIEM collects incomplete data, it can create false confidence because you think you have visibility when you do not. If it collects too much noisy data without context, it can overwhelm the team with alerts that do not lead to actionable decisions. The real purpose of SIEM is to make evidence accessible and to support consistent detection and investigation workflows, not to replace judgment. This is why SOC managers care about data quality, use case design, and alert tuning, because those decisions determine whether the SIEM becomes a tool for clarity or a generator of confusion. On an exam, answers that recognize this dependency on data quality and tuning are often more defensible than answers that treat the platform as a magic box. Endpoint detection and response, EDR, is another major category, and it focuses on what is happening on endpoints like laptops, desktops, and servers where users and processes interact directly. The value of EDR is that it can provide detailed visibility into process behavior, file activity, and other signals that are difficult to see purely from network or centralized log sources. It also often supports response actions at the endpoint, which means a team can contain risk by isolating a machine or stopping a suspicious process, depending on policy and authority. The reason EDR matters operationally is that many attacks involve endpoint activity that never shows up clearly in higher-level logs until the damage is already underway. A strong SOC uses EDR as both a detection source and an investigation assistant because it can answer questions like what executed, what changed, and what else the endpoint communicated with. When you understand EDR as deep endpoint visibility plus controlled response capability, you can evaluate scenarios more accurately and avoid assuming network tools alone will reveal everything. Network detection and response, NDR, is often discussed alongside EDR, and it addresses a different slice of the environment by focusing on network behavior and communications. Where EDR sees inside the endpoint, NDR tries to detect suspicious patterns in traffic flows, connections, and network-level anomalies that might indicate scanning, command and control, or unexpected data movement. This category becomes especially relevant when endpoint telemetry is limited, such as environments with unmanaged devices, legacy systems, or constraints that prevent full endpoint coverage. It also helps identify lateral movement patterns, because attackers often move between systems in ways that create network signals even if endpoint logs are incomplete. The operational reason NDR matters is that it can provide early warning when something is behaving unusually across the environment, and it can give investigators a map of which systems communicated during a suspected incident. A beginner should remember that network behavior can be noisy and context-dependent, so NDR works best when it is tuned to normal baselines and connected to other evidence sources. When you see NDR in a scenario, think visibility into movement and connections rather than a definitive verdict on what is malicious. Because SOC work depends so heavily on identity and access management, IAM, platforms and identity telemetry often become crucial sources of signal and control. IAM systems govern how accounts are created, how permissions are assigned, and how access is granted, and these functions define who can do what in the environment. From a detection standpoint, identity logs reveal authentication events, access requests, privilege changes, and abnormal usage patterns that can indicate credential theft or account misuse. From a response standpoint, identity is one of the most effective places to contain an incident because disabling an account or reducing privileges can quickly reduce an attacker's ability to act. The operational reason identity tooling matters is that many attacks are fundamentally about using legitimate access in illegitimate ways, so the most important evidence may be who authenticated, from where, and what they accessed next. A SOC that ignores identity often ends up chasing symptoms while missing the control plane that determines access. When you understand IAM as both a control mechanism and a rich signal source, you can connect security operations decisions to the most common attacker paths. Security orchestration, automation, and response, SOAR, platforms exist because human attention is limited, and the SOC must handle repetitive tasks consistently without burning people out. The key idea behind SOAR is orchestration, meaning coordinating actions across tools and teams, automation, meaning performing repeatable steps without manual clicking, and response support, meaning guiding what happens next in a predictable workflow. A well-used SOAR platform can reduce time spent on routine enrichment, such as gathering context from multiple data sources, and it can enforce consistent documentation and escalation steps. The reason this matters is that many SOC delays come from switching between systems, copying details, and doing the same checks repeatedly for every alert. Automation can also reduce mistakes by ensuring that standard steps happen every time, especially during high volume. However, it is important to avoid assuming SOAR is a replacement for judgment, because automation can amplify errors if the underlying logic is wrong. In exam terms, the best reasoning usually treats SOAR as a way to make good processes faster and more consistent, not as a shortcut around analysis. Case management systems are a category that beginners sometimes underestimate, yet they are central to programs that run well because they create continuity and accountability. Case management is the structured way the SOC tracks alerts, investigations, evidence, decisions, and outcomes so work can be coordinated across time and across people. When an incident spans multiple shifts or teams, a case record prevents loss of context and reduces duplicate effort by showing what has already been checked and what remains uncertain. It also supports escalation and communication by providing a single source of truth for current status, severity, and next steps. The operational reason case management matters is that security work is rarely finished in one moment, and without a strong tracking system, the team becomes vulnerable to forgetting, miscommunication, and inconsistent documentation. Case records also support learning because they allow after-action review and trend analysis to improve detections and processes. For the exam, understanding case management helps you choose answers that emphasize controlled coordination rather than ad hoc messaging and memory-based tracking. When you see a scenario involving multiple stakeholders and ongoing investigation, case management is often the foundation that makes the response defensible. User and Entity Behavior Analytics, UEBA, is a category that tries to detect misuse by focusing on behavior patterns rather than fixed signatures. The basic idea is that users, systems, and accounts typically behave in stable ways, and significant deviations can signal compromise, insider misuse, or automation abuse. UEBA can be useful for spotting subtle activity that does not match known malware patterns, such as unusual access timing, unusual resource access, or unusual sequences of actions. The operational value is strongest when UEBA findings are treated as leads that prompt validation, not as automatic proof of malicious intent. Beginners should understand that behavior analytics can also generate false positives because people's behavior changes for legitimate reasons like new projects or travel. That is why UEBA works best when it is integrated with other evidence sources and when the SOC has a clear process for triaging these alerts. In exam reasoning, a mature approach uses UEBA to improve visibility into unusual behavior while still requiring evidence-based confirmation before disruptive action. Thinking this way helps you avoid extremes of either trusting analytics blindly or dismissing it entirely. Vulnerability management tools appear in SOC discussions because many incidents are enabled by known weaknesses and operations must connect detection with prevention priorities. Vulnerability management is the process of discovering weaknesses, prioritizing them based on risk, and tracking remediation so exposure decreases over time. While a SOC is not always the team that patches systems, the SOC often uses vulnerability context to interpret alerts and to prioritize response. For example, an alert involving a system with a known high-risk weakness may be treated as more urgent because the likelihood of exploitation is higher. Vulnerability data also helps detection engineering by informing which exploit behaviors to watch for and which systems need extra monitoring. The operational reason this matters is that prevention and detection should reinforce each other, and vulnerability information is one of the clearest bridges between those functions. Beginners should also recognize that vulnerability tools often produce long lists, so prioritization is essential, and that prioritization should align with critical assets and attack paths. On the exam, choosing to integrate vulnerability context into triage decisions often reflects a more defensible, risk-driven approach than treating every system as equally exposed. Threat intelligence, TI, platforms and feeds also influence SOC technology choices, but their purpose is frequently misunderstood by new learners. TI is meant to help teams understand what threats are relevant, what behaviors to expect, and what indicators might support detection, and its value depends on how well it is translated into operations. A TI platform might aggregate intelligence, help assess source reliability, and distribute intelligence to tools that can use it, such as detection rules or enrichment steps. The operational benefit is strongest when TI improves prioritization, such as focusing monitoring on behaviors that are currently common against similar environments. It can also speed investigations by providing context about suspicious artifacts, but it should not be treated as the final authority for whether something is truly malicious. Beginners should remember the earlier distinction between intelligence and evidence, because TI guides attention while evidence confirms reality. When you see TI discussed in an exam scenario, the best answer usually involves using it to improve detection coverage and triage context, not using it as a substitute for investigation. This keeps response decisions proportional and defensible. Log management and data pipeline tooling is less glamorous than detection platforms, but it is often the difference between a SOC that can investigate and one that cannot. Logs must be collected reliably, normalized consistently, stored securely, and retained long enough to support investigations and compliance needs. If the data pipeline is fragile, outages or gaps can erase evidence, and that can turn an incident into an unsolved mystery. Data pipeline tools also support enrichment, which means adding context like asset criticality, owner information, and identity attributes so alerts are meaningful rather than raw. The operational reason this category matters is that the SOC cannot reason well without good data, and poor data leads to slow decisions and false conclusions. Beginners sometimes focus on detection logic while ignoring the quality of the underlying telemetry, but in real operations, improving logging often produces more value than adding new detections. On an exam, recognizing that visibility prerequisites must be met before advanced detection is a sign of mature thinking. When a scenario suggests missing evidence, improving telemetry and data consistency is often the most defensible next step. Integration is where many SOC programs succeed or fail because tools that do not share context create friction and gaps. Safe integration means data can flow between platforms without breaking trust, without exposing sensitive information unnecessarily, and without creating a fragile web of dependencies that collapses during incidents. Operationally, integration should reduce time to understanding by allowing analysts to pivot between evidence sources quickly, such as moving from a SIEM alert to ED or endpoint context and then into a case record. It should also support consistent action, such as allowing approved response steps to be executed and documented through controlled workflows. Beginners should understand that integration is not always beneficial because poorly designed integration can amplify alert volume, duplicate tickets, or spread errors across systems. That is why SOC design often emphasizes purposeful integration, where the goal is to support specific services and use cases rather than connecting everything just because it is possible. On the exam, you will often be rewarded for choosing integration decisions that improve reliability and evidence flow while respecting least privilege and governance. Integration is valuable when it simplifies the pipeline and strengthens outcomes, not when it adds complexity that nobody can maintain. The most important reason to understand these platforms is that exam questions often test what a tool category can realistically do and what it cannot do, which affects what response decision makes sense. If a scenario is missing visibility into endpoint activity, proposing a network-only solution may not address the real gap. If a scenario involves high alert fatigue due to repetitive enrichment tasks, adding automation through SOA may be more effective than adding staff alone. If a scenario requires coordinated response across teams and time, case management and discipline workflow may be the key, not another detection feed. If a scenario suggests that identity compromise is a major risk, strengthening IAM telemetry and access controls may have more leverage than tuning a single network alert. This kind of reasoning is not about being a tool expert. It is about understanding roles and constraints so you can choose defensible actions. Beginners can do this well by focusing on the function each platform provides in the pipeline. When you keep function in view, tool categories stop being intimidating and become practical building blocks. As you move forward, the skill to keep practicing is translating tool categories into operational outcomes, because operations management is about results, not about platforms. SOC runs well when it can see meaningful activity, interpret it with context, decide with consistent thresholds, coordinate response, and learn from outcomes to improve. Tools support those outcomes when they are selected for clear purposes, integrated safely, and operated with disciplined processes. The biggest traps are expecting technology to replace planning, expecting automation to replace judgment, and expecting data volume to equal visibility. If you understand what common platforms do and why they exist, you will read scenarios with a calmer mindset, because you will know which category fits the problem and which category would be a mismatch. That confidence helps you choose answers that emphasize clarity, evidence, and sustainable operations rather than impulsive tool-driven fixes. Keep this functional view in mind. and the next technology-focused topics will feel like natural extensions of how a SOC actually works.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.